For us as a family, we were celebrating the holiday of Simchat Torah. It's a very joyous holiday in the Jewish calendar. Friday night we were dancing as a community at synagogue and waking up at 7 a.m. to air raid sirens and taking my wife and my children, in their pajamas without shoes, running into a bomb shelter.
So we have Alex Traiman, CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of Jewish News Syndicate, here with us today. Thank you for being here with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You are in Jerusalem, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can you talk to me about what you see on the ground where you are in terms of the war efforts and all that?
Sure. Jerusalem's probably been quieter than some of the other fronts in the war. We're not in the immediate Gaza envelope. We're not near southern Lebanon, where hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes. Also, during the war, Hamas has been firing rockets mostly up the coast of Israel, in the direction of Tel Aviv, where there's numerous Israeli cities, one after the other. So, I mean, even today, 2 months later, they're still firing rockets and Israelis are running into bomb shelters. But Jerusalem has not been the primary target of the Hamas rockets. So it's been a bit more quiet. At the same time, it's tense because we have 250,000 Arabs living in the city, in the eastern sections of the city. Just last week, there was a major terror attack. Two brothers from the Arab village of Sur Baher, which is about a quarter mile from my house in Jerusalem, started shooting at a bus stop near the entrance of the city. That's a bus stop where one of my sons gets off to go to school every day. So definitely tense, but compared to the type of situation that we've seen in other parts of the country, it's relatively quiet, and Israelis are pretty resilient.
Can you talk a little bit about how Israelis are responding to the attacks and now the war?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was a game-changing moment for the state of Israel. Israel is surrounded by enemies that have sought its destruction for decades, if not centuries. But there was a feeling inside Israel that an attack like this wasn't really possible, or certainly wasn't that it was inevitable. And this was a severe breakdown of the Israeli intelligence and security, but also the conceptual view of strength that Israel had, and they now realize that that the enemies, when they say that they want to attack you, that they mean it, and they're going to try to attack you, and you can't always depend on the technological advantage or superiority to prevent an attack. I think for Israelis, there's no going back to this moment, to the day before October 7th. In the years leading up to this attack, there was definitely a movement in Israel to continue along the formula of land for peace, to go toward the creation of a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. I think Israelis see Gaza as the pilot project of that independent Palestinian entity, and understand very clearly that there's no peace to be made with populations as long as they're being ruled by fanatical terror organizations that are receiving funding from the international community in Iran and other places. And so, the idea that a two-state solution is going to be closer now because of this attack is a preposterous idea inside of Israel. And Israelis understand that the only guarantor of their security in any of the territories, disputed or otherwise, is when the IDF has full access to those territories and full security control over those territories.
Yes, absolutely. In addition to this kind of thought change, have you seen other uh, shifts in the culture there because of the war?
Yeah, certainly. In the months leading up to October 6th, October 7th, there was a lot of political divisiveness in Israel, and in some ways very similar to the United States. And we saw, even in the summertime, massive protests in the streets against proposed reforms to the judicial system that were being brought forward by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. And there was just, her very bad scenes and very bad discourse, people talking about their possibilities of a civil war in Israel, which is not true. I mean, there's nobody, not one person in Israel that thought that we were careening toward a civil war, but, the rhetoric was really getting out of control. And I think that it actually is one of the foundations that indicated to Hamas and Hezbollah and their backers in Iran that Israel was susceptible to an attack because they were divided. And we've really seen the Israeli public since October 7th come together in a very incredible way because existential crises really remind people that they have much more in common than that which separates them. And so the spirit of volunteerism, members, it doesn't matter if you voted for Netanyahu or you oppose Netanyahu, if you're right wing, if you're left wing, if you're religious, if you're secular, everybody has sons and daughters and parents and brothers and sisters and best friends and colleagues that are now fighting inside Gaza, and in live fire, with Hamas terrorists. So it really has brought people together in a very, very powerful way. And the hope is that in the day after this war, whenever that will be, that spirit of unity remains. I can certainly say that there are the same elements that try to divide the society. They haven't given up their campaigns, but hopefully the Israeli public will prevail in a more sane conversation on the day after.
Yes. For non-Jewish residents in Israel, are you seeing protests? Are they pro-Hamas in your area? Are you seeing any demonstrations or anything like that? Kind of like we see at some of the universities in America?
Well, if you're talking about the Arab residents in particular, they don't do peaceful protests. If the Arab residents would have undertaken peaceful protests in the last several decades, you might have seen the Israeli society bend and allow major concessions, land concessions in exchange for peace. But peaceful protest is not the MO of these societies. And those that do choose to protest select violent protest. And in 2021, 2 years ago, we saw during the last round of conflict between Israel and the Gaza Strip, which was a much more minor round of conflict than what we're seeing now. We also saw riots in mixed Arab Israeli cities like Ramla and Lod. We saw pogroms, synagogues being burned. We saw mass protests out on the streets. It wasn't peaceful. It was more maybe along the style of what you saw in maybe Black Lives Matter protests in certain cities in America. And it was a wake-up call to Israel, who realized that these Israeli citizens, Israeli residents, also harbored a significant ill will to the state. It's been surprising so far that since October 7th, we have not seen a return to that violent protest, with the exception of a handful of terror attacks, which have really been ongoing since even before October 7th. Hasn't stopped. There's still violent terror attacks, but it hasn't been mass scale intifada like we've seen in previous go rounds here in Israel. So fortunately, the quiet has been relatively kept, and it remains to be seen whether this tense situation will erupt.
Yes. What have you personally experienced, an event or experience that you've had that you'll never forget?
I mean, for us as a family, we were celebrating the holiday of Simchat Torah. It's a very joyous holiday in the Jewish calendar, where you celebrate the completion of the annual cycle of reading the Torah and the beginning of the next cycle. Friday night we were dancing as a community at synagogue and waking up at 7 a.m. to air raid sirens and, taking my wife and my children, in their pajamas without shoes, running into a bomb shelter. And for those that are, more religiously observant, not gluing myself to a television, a radio, or a cell phone that day, even as a member of the media, and kind of getting this secondhand information, what people are hearing, that there's been an infiltration. I mean, nobody was planning a war. Nobody thought that a war was possible on this day. And all of a sudden to know that there was an attack and it's serious and many people are dead and we don't know how many and maybe 100 or 200 and that cities have been overtaken. It was completely surreal experience and one that we'll probably never forget.
How can Americans help this situation? How can we be of help to Israel?
Well, we're in a battle for public opinion. Obviously Hamas, they don't actually think that they can defeat the IDF, which is one of the world's most powerful and battle-ready armies and sophisticated armies with an air force and precision-guided weaponry, that they can defeat Israel on the battlefield. So they actually invited the IDF to come into their territory in order that the IDF should kill as many civilians as possible, in order that public opinion against Israel would shift, and they would actually be able to get the international community and others to force Israel to stop. And that would be a victory for Hamas. And so the key is for American audience to understand what the Hamas strategy actually is and to repel that strategy by not giving in to the propaganda, and by demanding that their congressmen and senators support Israel, throughout this conflict, that they give them the leeway to finish fighting against Hamas. And this fight also may expand into Lebanon to fight Hezbollah and potentially into Yemen to fight the Houthis, which are also attacking Israel. And potentially all the way to Iran, which is the head of this terror octopus with its tentacles all over the Middle East. And also to share good information. There's a lot of bad information that's cycling on social media. And it's important to point it out. The algorithms are favoring the bad information, to be honest. So the way you can help that is by sharing good information and having others share it. The more good information gets shared, the more it starts to run through the algorithms. Certainly you should be getting your information from a good source. I think that JNS, the Jewish News Syndicate, is a very reliable, high quality source of information and analysis for what's going on. But so it's getting good information, understanding that a lot of what you might be seeing in the mainstream media is not reliable. A good example of that was on October 17th when Hamas claimed that the IDF had bombed the hospital and killed 500 people. The only problem was that it wasn't the IDF that hit the hospital. It was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket. It didn't actually hit the hospital, it hit the parking lot of the hospital. And there's no way that 500 people were killed and not 100 and probably not even 20. But that didn't stop the BBC, the New York Times, CNN, the Associated Press, Reuters, and others from repeating the Hamas talking point that the IDF had bombed the hospital and killed 500 people. In fact, if you go onto Google today and you type Reuters, IDF bombs hospital October 17th, you'll see no fewer than 10 articles that are claiming today that the IDF bombed the hospital in the Gaza Strip and killed 500 people. So, to understand that the information that you're getting might not be good, to verify it, to go to good source of information, and to share that to help boost the algorithms in favor of accurate information.
Is there anything I haven't asked you that you think our audiences need to know about what's going on in Israel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important to note, and we just touched on it a minute ago, that this really isn't a war between Israelis and Palestinians. This really isn't a war about land. There's a lot of Arabs that live inside Israel with relative security and much higher standard of living than Arabs that live under Arab sovereignty in the Middle East. But there are elements that are funded by Iran. And again, Israel's been attacked by Hamas. They've been attacked by Hezbollah more than 1,000 times so far since this war started, by the Houthis that have sent ballistic and cruise missiles at Israel and are hijacking ships that are going to Israel in the Red Sea. And these are all terror proxies of Iran, and other terror proxies have been hitting at American interests, both in Iraq and in Syria since the war started, over 100 times, actually. So this is a war between Israel and the West against Iran. And let's not also forget that the Biden administration and before that, the Obama administration have really made it their primary foreign policy priority to fund Iran and to bring Iran into the community of nations. And all the money that they've received from the international community, a large chunk of that has gone to an illicit nuclear weapons program and to be funding its terror proxies. And so you have a genocidal regime in Iran that calls for the destruction of Israel, that is building the weapons of destruction to carry out their genocidal aims. And if you don't think that they would use those nuclear weapons to accomplish that goal, well, just look what they're doing with the other funds that they have. They've been funding these terror organizations, the worst terror organizations on earth, which are Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, which are completely and totally destabilizing the region. And Israel actually has an obligation to take out these terror organizations and to stop them at the source. And if they do that, they're going to transform. Israel is going to transform the Middle East, and we've already seen that because Israel has signed normalization agreements with already the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan, and is already in talks to expand these accords to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, which is the very seat of Islam. So Israel has proved itself, and it already has peace agreements with Egypt and with Jordan. So Israel is willing to make peace and to actually turn the entire region towards peace. But the only way to do that is to stamp out this terror. And so I think it's really important that people understand, the source of the attacks on Israel, which is Iran, and understand the need to remove this source so that the entire region can blossom and flourish the way it's always been meant to do.
Alex, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.